Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we're Masechtas Nazir daf Nun Aleph. We are going to begin on the very top of Nun Aleph Amud Aleph, which goes back to our previous discussion with the Mishnah on Mem Tesam and Beis, that there are certain ways that a Nazir who comes in contact with a mace that he will be required to be Megaleach, that he'll need to shave. And one of them is if he's in contact with a Mole Tarvid Rekev, namely a spoon dust full which came from a mace. And we were discussing in yesterday's daf if it has to be the palm, is it just the fingers, is it the conclusivity of the entire hand filled of this dust. So now the Gemara discusses this in today's daf at greater length. Tanabanim. Ezehu mei sheish lo rekev. What is considered to be the remains of a mace that has rotten, the dusts, namely of the corpse, that we say that this is considered to fall into this category, that it makes a person tameh. So the Gemara says like this: Mace nikvar orim. First of all, it has to be that the mace had to be buried without any clothing, because as the body disintegrated with clothes, so the clothes also are part of those ashes, and it's brought down in Gemara Nida. Tosfos brings down that it cannot have gilgolin. There cannot be any mixture of other things. It has to be pure ash that comes from a mace. And therefore, if there's clothing on the mace, so then the din is that it will not be matama. In addition to that, it has to be ba'aron shel shayish. It's got to be an aron, a casket which is made out of marble, which means because of the way it's constructed, it wasn't, for example, a pine box in which the ashes could also have come from that, and therefore that would be gilgolim. Oh, al gabi ritzba shel avanim. If the mace is just found on a stone floor, then that would also be acceptable because a stone doesn't produce dust. Zehu mace sheish lo rekev. That is a case of a mace which has rekev, and therefore it will be matam. However, nikvar b'chsusai, if a mace, which typically is buried with tachrichim, ba'aron shel eitz, it's a wooden box, so al gabi rispa shel lavanim, zehu mace she'ein lo rekev. So then, if you'd be even on a floor, but again, it's a floor which could potentially also cause some level of its own ashes, its own dust, so therefore that doesn't fall into the category. It's meish she'ein lo rekev, because again it's called gilgolin. It's a mixture, and if it's a mixture, then it doesn't have the din. Okay, so Omer Ula, ein rekev el haba min habasar. He says the only time we have this din of rekev, it must have all these things. It has to come from basar, meat, the flesh, min agidin, and from the sinews, and from the bones. This is what is required in order for it to fall into this category. So if you look in Tosfos, Mekum Sar Shehei Harekev, from all of them it needs to be this rekev. Okay, in order for it to be considered this dust. So where it says, wait 1 second. It says rekev, which comes from basar tahar, hamin etzem tameh. If it comes from a bone, tameh, v'afgad the lake of basar, even if it doesn't have basar. So we see it's not true. It doesn't need to have basar. The atzamos don't have to have basar. So Eimahachi say this: rekev habomen a basar tahar. If you have rekev which came from tahar flesh, ad sheish etzem bebasar. You need to have etzem also in the basar for it to constitute as a rekev. Haleki gidim. But what do you mean? I thought you said it also has to have sinews for it to be rekev. So you eat actual basar, let's samos below gidim. It's impossible that you're going to find bones and flesh without the sinews. So they're all going to be there. Omer Rav Shmuel bar Abba Rav Yochanan shnei meisim shekavrin zem zeh. What if you have two corpses that are together, buried together? So nasu gilgolim zelazeh. It's considered to be gilgolim. Even though they're both, let's say they were naked and they were on shel shayish, doesn't matter. The mixture of two dead bodies will not produce this rekev will not be considered to be tamei. It says the Mefarish, nas kimi shnis arvu zeh v'zeh. It's like they were mixed together. Ve'ein zeh rekev gomer. This is not considered to be true rekev. Must have Rab Nosin. What are you talking about? Rekev haba mebeis mesim tamei. We see that it is tamei, even if there's from two mesim. So Gemara says it depends. Omerava shiko, and this is going to be question 3 in TB 26. Rava says shikavru zeb ifni atzmo zeb ifni atzmo v'hir kivu. What ended up happening was the bodies decomposed separately. They weren't buried together. They were totally separate, and therefore they already produced their own rekev. V'amdu amoli tarvid rekev. And then they ended up basically combining each of their own full levels of rekev together. So therefore, the rekev, because they were separated, took upon itself this level of tuma. And now even afterwards, that ends up mixing together afterwards, that's how it's going to become tummy. However, if originally the two mason were buried together, and then they bodies decomposed to produce this rekev, that will not become tummy. Question 3. Rekev b'mishnei mason mitztarfu moli tarvid. So it says nikvru yachad, if they're buried together, nasagu gomzoseh, and therefore it's not tamei. Kavru zeb ifnei atzmo over here kivu mitztarfen, as we said. Okay, weiter. So now they want to ask a different question. So v'amdu al moli tarvid rekev. Okay. Omer Rabbi bar Chana Rabbi Yochanan gazas aro. Let's say you have a mace and you cut, and the hair of the mace is cut off. V'kavru imo, and then you end up burying the hair together with the mace. So nasalu gilgolim. We say that the hair also creates this element of gilgolim, and therefore it's not going to produce the rekev this produces will not be matama. Says the Mefarish of kilo gazas, which is mashma if you didn't cut it off, which means it was mechuber to the mace, the hair is still attached to the dead body, then niyachu mechuber kamoshehu lo nasal gilgolim. So therefore, even though the body has hair, the hair is not going to cause a problem in the mixture. It's only when it was first cut off, and then afterwards it was put in together with the mace. This is TA 26. We're part of the answer here. He says, "Im se'er nasa gilgolim bir es chiluki hadinim b'zeh." So one point, first of all, is that if it's guzes and it was cut off and then you put it in together with the mace, then nasa gilgolim, and therefore it's not tamei. However, b'mechuber, as we saw in Mefarish, lo nasa, it doesn't create gilgolim, which means it'll still be matama. And we have one more point that we're going to be discussing. Tanan hasam, kol shib'meis tamei. Any element or part from a mace is matama, chutz min hashinayim, excluding the teeth, v'haser and the hair, v'atzipirin and the nails, v'shas chiburin kulin tamein. However, if the hair is still attached, as we saw already, then it's tamei. So boichis kisar ha'aymin legaz legaleach. Let's say you have hair that is standing to be shaven. Sipirin ha'aymin legazes, nails that are about to be cut. Mi amrin and kol ha'aymin legazes k'gaizes dami. Do we say that since it's due to have it cut anyway, it's like it's already removed? Or do we say no? Right now it is attached. So if before Misa the hair was due to be cut because it's very, very long hair, so do we consider that ki'u like it's detached, even though at the time when the person died, the hair is still attached? So maybe we can say it's gazas because you cut it off and you put it in. That's when it's gilgolim, which is mashma holo gazas low, which means if you didn't cut it off, we don't say that it's a nasa kami. We don't say kol oimligzes kagazes. So hachi kaimer. So maybe that's a raya. No hachi kaimer. Gazas harizeh gilgolim. If you cut it off, it's gilgolim. Lo gazas miboile, but if you didn't cut it off, that is the question. So that's the last part of TA 26. This is the niboy the ifshato. We don't know the answer. Boy Rabbi Yirmiyahu rekev habam ekev mahu. What about the ash that comes from the heel, from the foot? So what is the din of that? What is its status? Mahu Kiamrina and rekev haba mekuli mace. Do we say the rekev comes from the whole body of the mace of the asim and akev? It comes from the ankle low. Shna. So what is this notion of the akev? So says Taisis Lefi Shiba Ekvai Shal Adam Yeshba Oivi Basar. It's a very thick skin by the ankle, and therefore Shein Boichius. It has no life. In other words, even while a person is alive, that skin is like dead skin. So therefore, maybe because of that, the akev doesn't take upon itself the din of rekev. Tashma, the Tani Rab Nasan Rabbi Yoishia, rekev haba mishnei mesim. We saw before that even a rekev, which comes from two different bodies, tameh. Nabi Yisach darach haba min akev lozil hacha dilma derech akev kasi. Maybe we should be concerned that the rekev came from the akev, and if it's true that the akev it produces rekev, that's not considered to be rekev, to be matama, so then shouldn't we have that concern? V'hacha dilma derech akev kasi. The Gemara says no, we're not concerned when it comes to a whole body, because the irkiv kuli mace v'kasi derech akev hachinami. If, let's say, we're talking about the entirety of the body has rotten, and is in that situation, there's no shayla that we shouldn't be concerned about. Maybe it came from the akev, that this rekev is from the akev because you have the whole body. El hachago in the irkav chad aver because derech akev my teku. Over here, the akev may have caused the entire aver, one limb, to become rekev. So it's only a shayla when it comes to one aver, what the din is by the status of an akev. But if it's the entirety of a body that has decomposed and it produces this rekev, then we're not going to attribute it to the akev. Okay, by Rabbi Yirmiyah, uber b'mei isha, when it comes to a woman who is pregnant, who tragically dies, and she dies pregnant, havi gulgolim olo, does that fetus inside of her create gulgolim? And therefore the din is that she's not considered, it's not tameh, this rekev. So what's the studim? Kivandi amar uber hilka gufahu volyahavi gulgolim. There's an element called uber yerech imoi, that the infant is considered to be like one of the mother, and therefore because of that it's not like a separate entity, and because of that the din is that it's not gulgolim. Maybe we don't look at the reality of what it is now, but because a fetus will not be there forever, typically, it'll end up coming out of the mother as it's a separate entity, so therefore maybe it is gulgolim if it's mixed together. If maybe you want to tell me the fact that it will eventually come out, so therefore it's considered to be separate, and therefore we're going to say it's gulgolim, and therefore it's not going to become matama. So as we continue in Alpha Meves, okay, how about shichva zera? How about the shichva zera, which comes from a man that is b'mei isha, which is in a woman, mahu mi amrin kivan delo itzar, since it wasn't formed, ki gufa dami, it's like part of her body, because it says the Mefarish kigan shemeisa shahaisabo bas banim, that she died when she was a bas banim, able to have children. The stam isha bas banim isla shechva zera b'meyaha. We assume that there could still be shechva zera within her. Oshin nivla samachla musasa, or she had relations right before she died, so she may have shechva zera in her body. So odilma kivan dema alma kaasilo, maybe because it's a foreign, something which comes not from her, so therefore the din is, again, it will have gulgolim, because it's separate. Again, no answer. Boira papa, pirsha mahu. How about when it comes to the waste matter, which is inside her body? Kivan delo mekaima, since it doesn't stay there, but lo yachla chayusahu o dilma hanami alma kas asi. Again, the question is it considered to be like, since it's within her body, so it's going, which gives her, it's the part of her you eat, it's part of the digestive system, so it's part of her body, or because it comes out, it's considered to be separate. And therefore, again, if it produces this ash from it and it gets mixed up, is a gulgolim. What about the skin? How about the saliva and mucus? Rav Shmuel Barachel Rav Papa V'Salatata Kol Hanid Amar Havi Gilgolim. If you want to tell me the skin, the mucus, all these different things are Gilgolim. So every mace has these things like waste matter, bone, waste matter, skin. How are you gonna have a mace without any skin when it dies? So a body has skin, a body has waste in it, a body has mucus, other liquids. So he said maybe we're talking about the ashke me de kolum. You drank this concoction, which basically cleared out your digestive tract, so you have no waste. The sachi nasha, and you put cream on your head to remove all your hair, so you're bald, so the hair is not an issue. The shalklu b'mei Tveria, and you were cooked up in the Mei Tveria in these hot springs, and therefore all your skin was melted off, basically. So that's saying that it's an unlikely situation, but it would have to be that case that's how you would maybe say that if all these things are gugolim, that there would be this one situation where you could become tameh in this way. Amar Abayda, nachtinon mace shetochnu. There's a din that if you have a mace that was ground up, again, ein lo rekev. That's even that you see rekev because the body was ground up. The din is it doesn't have the status of rekev. Iboiluhu tochnu. Let's say the body was first ground up, v'chazer v'hirkiv, and then afterwards it decomposed. Mahu midihu taima el deika basa v'ginim atzamois. Va'ika, we said that you have to have these basic things in order to be rekev. You have to have bone, sinews, flesh, and it's there. Odilma kibriyasum inan v'leika. It needs to decay in a whole while it's in a whole state, and that's not what happened. Tegu. Tani ula barchanina meis shechasar ein lo rekev. If you have a mace which is missing part of its body, ein lo rekev, that's also ein lo rekev. Lo tafsua is also the din of tafusa, of lo tafusa. So on this, the Mefarsh explains, what is that? V'lo tafusa ki hahi did not come on. We'll see later on. Hamoitzi mace, that one removes a mace from a grave. Mushkav kedarkai noitlo of the estivusasai. So you take out the remains, and you also have to remove 3 fingers worth of earth around the mace. However, since this body is missing a limb, there's no din of tfusa, that you don't have to take the extra earth around the mace. So what is that? Says the Mefarsh, Matzah shloisha. If you find 3 bodies, hari zu shchunis kvoyos. This is like a cemetery. They're kind in kaima. They're kind of the place. The ulhecha the chaser aver echad mehan eno shchunis kvoyos v'lo kind in kaiman. The only time is if the bodies were whole, but if one of these 3 bodies was missing a limb, so then we don't follow the din of shchunis kvoyos. Okay, which means that they're not kaim in kaimo. It's not considered like a cemetery. Once it's a cemetery, you can't touch that cemetery. It has to remain. However, there's only one body there, so maybe you could remove it and put it somewhere else. So that's why it's important to know, again, whether or not this mace, assuming you're able to figure it out and see whether if this is a mace shechaser is missing a limb. Fine. Now, mace, the Gemara asks a question. Loi im amarta b'meis sheish lo roiv. Voroiva, if we're talking about a mace which has roiv binyan, the majority of its bones or the majority of its bone structure, voroiva, or a quarter kav of bones, omoli tarvid rekev, or it has a measurement again of a spoonful of this ash of the decay, timer b'chai. However, when it comes to ksais basar, she'en lo roiva, if it's kazayis basar chai, it's alive but it's like amputated part. There's no din of roiv or roiva v'loy moli tarvid rekev, which means it's not going to be matama, and it's not considered to be rekev. So hechidami, what exactly is the case regarding the living person? The arkiv chad aver. It's referring to one of its limbs. A person's limb was amputated and it decomposed. So the kavasi gami mace afil chad aver. So it must be in comparison to a mace, one of the limbs were decomposed. Ika rekev. So we see that there is rekev even with one limb by a mace. So mika tani ha mace hakamashmun shum mace yeshlo rekev shum chai ein lo rekev. It's just telling you in general that there is this concept when it comes to the limb of a dead body, of a living person, there's never rekev. However, when it comes to a dead person, we know that there is a din of rekev sometimes. Boy Rava, hirkiv kishu chai. Let's say that it decomposed while the person was still alive because of a mace, and then the guy died. Mahu ki gamiri rekev. When do we say this din of the din of rekev? Megutame di irkav kishu mace. Maybe it's only when the limb decomposed while the person was still had already died. Odil, however, this person lives, so maybe this limb will not cause rekev. Odil mahashtami hames, but he's dead now, so therefore maybe the din is din rekev. Tashma lo ima marta b'meisheshmo loy roy b'roy b'moy tarvin rekev. So when it comes to a mace, which has all these different dinim to mimatama. So time mishum chai hameis yeshul rekev. Mashma, if the guy died, there will be rekev once he's dead. No mikatani hameis hakamashmon to shomeis yeshul rekev shum chai ein lo rekev. Okay, we're going to stop there, and that is it. Adkan.